So continuing on with the quadratic formula, we know that if we're given any quadratic equation, we can use this formula to solve it. The first thing we need to realize is that there are these things called coefficients, and they're going to be labeled A, B, and C. And coefficients are just the big numbers in front of the variables. So looking at this equation right here, we know that C is always going to be the last number. And we know that B is always going to be the number in front of the X. Now, since there's no number in front of the X right here, we're going to assume that B is going to be equal to 1. B is going to be equal to 1. And then for A, we know that A is always in front of the X squared, but there's no number right here. We're going to also assume that this is going to be a 1. So we know that A is going to be 1, we know that B is going to be 1, and we know that C is also going to be 1. Okay? So now that we know what A, B, and C are, we can just plug them into the formula and figure out what the solutions are going to be. So, as always, the X is going to remain the same. So I'm going to write down X. And then I know that B is going to be 1, so this is going to be a negative 1. Remember, the negative always goes in front of the B for this step. Okay? Now the plus or minus is going to come down, and then we have the square root of B squared minus 4AC. I know that B is going to be 1, so I'm going to put 1 inside parentheses, and I'm going to square it. Minus 4 times A times C. And since A and C are both going to be 1s, I'm going to put 1s inside there. Now the final step is everything is going to be divided by A. 2 is always going to be a constant, so the 2 doesn't change, but I know that the A right beside it is going to be the 1, so I'm going to put a 1 inside parentheses at the bottom. Alright, so the first thing that we always do is we always work with the radical first. So I'm going to be simplifying this first. And then after that, we're going to be working with the plus minus and this number off to the side right here. This is going to be the second thing that we do. And then the last thing is going to be dividing by whatever in the denominator. So this is going to be the third thing that we do. Okay, so let's work inside the radical first. I bring down my x and my equal sign. My negative 1 is going to stay the same, and I bring down my plus or minus. Now, inside the radical, I have 1 squared. I know that 1 squared is 1 times 1, which is going to be 1. And then I have a minus 4 times 1 times 1. And multiplying all three of these numbers together, I know that 4 times 1 times 1 is going to give me 4. Everything is still divided by 2 times 1, and we know that 2 times 1 is just going to be 2. Okay, so now we're almost done with the radical. I just need to simplify a little bit inside the radical before we move on. So I have x equals negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 4. And 1 minus 4 is going to give me negative 3. So I put a negative 3 on the inside of the radical. And everything is still divided by 2. Okay? So, if I have a negative number under the radical, remember that I can always bring the negative sign out as the imaginary number I. I can take the negative out as an I. So when I'm doing this, if I ever have a negative number under the radical, I can bring the negative out as an I. But the positive 3 has to stay under the radical. It can't come out. And everything is still divided by 2. So now I have an expression where I can't combine these, and I can't really divide by 2, so I just leave this the way it is. So my two answers are going to rely on the plus or minus in the middle. I could have that be a plus, or I could have that be a minus. Now, using the plus, I'm going to have negative 1 plus I times square root of 3, where everything is divided by 2. Or I could use the minus sign, right? I also have negative 1 minus I times the square root of 3 with everything being divided by 2. But you do need both of those. So I'm going to use the plus and the minus to find my two solutions. So now when I make a solution set, I'm going to put both of those numbers inside there. I'm going to have negative 1 plus I square root of 3 over 2. And then I'm going to have negative 1 minus I square root of 3, where everything is divided by 2. So this is an example where we use the formula and we get in and we actually have an imaginary answer. So both of these are going to be imaginary numbers. And the reason why both of these answers are imaginary is because the number under the square root was negative. And when that happens, our answers are going to be imaginary or complex.